The camera was pointed directly at the bed. Caleb Rowan knew that before he even knew what he was looking at. He stood barefoot in the master bedroom of Mason's private villa, his camera still raised toward the sunset, staring at a tiny black circle hidden inside what was supposed to be a smoke detector. For 3 seconds, his brain offered him every comforting explanation it could manufacture. A sensor, a screw, some expensive smart home thing rich people installed because apparently light switches were too emotionally exhausting. Then Caleb shifted 2 feet to his left. The reflection moved with him. His stomach dropped. He knew lenses. He photographed luxury homes for a living, which meant he knew where cameras belonged, how glass caught light, and what angle someone would choose if they wanted a clear view of a room. This one had been positioned perfectly. At the bed where he had slept beside the man he trusted. Caleb lowered his camera slowly. "No," he whispered. He was 27 years old, professionally skilled at noticing what other people missed, and somehow he had missed this. That hurt almost as much as the fear. This weekend was supposed to prove he and Mason were okay. Caleb had spent 6 months watching their relationship become increasingly strange. Questions about where he was going, jokes about who he texted, apologies that somehow ended with Caleb apologizing too. When Mason suggested 3 days alone at his family's villa, Caleb had wanted desperately to believe the gesture meant something. He wasn't asking for perfection. He wanted something embarrassingly ordinary. A relationship where trust didn't feel like a test he kept failing. Now his hands were shaking. Caleb set his DSLR carefully on the dresser because dropping $3,000 worth of equipment would really complete the evening. "Think," he murmured. That was what he did when panic arrived. He turned panic into details. The detector was 12 feet from the bed, mounted too low for the ceiling configuration, with a direct sight line unobstructed by furniture. Caleb dragged over a chair, climbed onto it, and twisted the plastic housing loose. A miniature camera sat. Inside, a wire disappeared through the wall. His pulse hammered. 1 camera could be explained badly. 2 could not. He found the second in a decorative vent facing the dressing area. Caleb photographed everything before touching it again. The placement, the wiring, the serial label. His fear was changing now, becoming colder, more useful. Then he heard footsteps downstairs. "Mason." Caleb climbed down and wrapped his fingers around the first camera. Mason appeared carrying 2 champagne glasses and smiling. "There you are. I thought you disappeared." Caleb held up the device. The smile vanished. Not confusion, not surprise, recognition. That was the moment Caleb's heart truly broke. "Tell me you didn't know," Caleb said. Mason set the glasses down. "Caleb, tell me. You're making this bigger than it is." Caleb actually laughed, one sharp breath of disbelief. "There is a camera pointed at your bed." "My bed. My house. I was in that bed." Silence. Mason's jaw tightened. Caleb felt something inside him go very still. "How long?" Mason looked away. "Wrong answer. How long have you been recording me?" "Keep your voice down." "Why?" Caleb asked. "Afraid the furniture will find out." Mason stepped closer. "Give me the camera." Caleb backed away. "No, Caleb. Are there recordings?" Mason didn't answer. Caleb's throat tightened. "Are there recordings of me?" Mason exhaled through his nose, irritation replacing whatever guilt Caleb had hoped to find. "You were never supposed to see them." The room seemed to tilt. Caleb thought of every private conversation, every vulnerable confession, every ordinary moment when he had believed nobody was watching. Delete them. It's complicated. No, it really isn't. Mason reached for the camera. Caleb pulled it against his chest. "Don't touch this. You don't understand what you're doing." "Then explain it." Mason's voice dropped. "You walk out with that, and things get difficult. For both of us." Caleb stared at him. There it was. Not an apology. A warning. "Are you threatening me?" Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Mason froze. The bedroom door opened. Everett Sloan stood there, one hand still on the handle, travel coat. Damp from the rain outside. Caleb had met Mason's older brother twice. Both times Everett had seemed controlled to the point of intimidation, a man who could silence a room by deciding not to speak. Now his eyes moved from Caleb's pale face to the camera clenched in his hand, then to Mason standing too close. Mason recovered first. "This is private, Everett." Everett ignored him. He looked directly at Caleb. "Did you know that camera was there?" Caleb swallowed. "No." Everett's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Then he stepped into the room and placed himself between them, not touching Caleb, not demanding the camera, simply making it impossible for Mason to reach him. "Everett," Mason warned. "Stay out of this." "No," the word was quiet. "Final." Mason scoffed. "You don't even know what happened." Everett kept his eyes on Caleb. "Do you want him near you?" Nobody had asked Caleb what he wanted all night. Maybe longer than that. His fingers tightened around the camera. "No." Everett turned toward his brother. "Then back away." Mason stared at him. "You're choosing him over me?" Everett's face went cold. "I'm choosing the person you recorded without his knowledge." For the first time since Caleb had seen that tiny reflection in the ceiling, the room stopped feeling like a trap. Everett reached into his pocket, placed a set of car keys on the dresser beside Caleb, and stepped back. "Those are yours if you want them. Or I can drive you. You can call the police, an attorney, anyone you trust. But keep the camera." Caleb looked at him. "You don't want it. It's your evidence." For words. Somehow, those 4 words gave Caleb something Mason had been quietly taking from him for months. Choice. Mason's face drained of color. "Caleb, if you leave with that." Everett finally looked at him. "Finish that sentence carefully." Silence swallowed the room. Caleb picked up his DSLR with one hand and the car keys with the other. He was still terrified, still betrayed, still unsure how much of his private life existed somewhere beyond his control. But he was no longer alone with the man who had done it. As Caleb moved toward the door, Everett stepped aside rather than leading him through it. Caleb understood the gesture. "You decide." He crossed the threshold on his own. Behind him, Mason suddenly said, "You think that's the only copy?" Caleb stopped. The fragile relief inside him shattered. Everett's gaze snapped toward his brother. Caleb slowly turned around. Mason realized too late what he had admitted. And beside Caleb, Everett said, very softly, "Now we find everyone." Caleb made it 6 steps down the hallway before his legs remembered they were allowed to shake. He stopped beside a narrow console table, gripping Everett's car keys so tightly the metal teeth pressed into his palm. Behind him, Mason started talking fast. "You are seriously going to let him leave with company property?" Everett answered without raising his voice. "The camera stays with Caleb. This is a Sloan property. It is my property." The correction landed with enough weight to silence Mason. Caleb looked back. He had always known Everett was successful, but Mason had described his older brother as if he were some humorless corporate machine who collected buildings and grudges with equal enthusiasm. Standing beneath the villa's warm hallway lights, Everett looked less like a machine and more like a man working very hard not to become furious. "You own this place?" Caleb asked. Everett nodded. "The company renovated it last year. Mason had permission to stay here. He did not have permission to install surveillance equipment." Mason folded his arms. "You do not know that I installed anything." Caleb's fear sharpened into attention. "Then you will not mind if I document it." Both brothers looked at him. Caleb lifted his DSLR. "I photograph buildings for a living. Camera locations, wiring, serial numbers, mounting marks. If someone removes anything later, I want a record of how I found it." For the first time, something changed in Everett's expression. Not pity. Respect. "Good," he said. "What do you need?" Caleb had expected Everett to take over. Men like him probably employed people whose entire careers consisted of taking over. Instead, he was asking. "Space," Caleb said. Everett immediately moved back. "You have it." Mason gave a humorless laugh. "This is ridiculous." He stepped toward the bedroom. Everett blocked him with one arm across the doorway. "No shove. No threat. Just an immovable boundary. You are done entering that room. You cannot order me around." Everett pulled out his phone. "I can revoke your access to every Sloan property before you reach the stairs." Mason stared at him. Everett tapped the screen once. "I just did." Caleb almost forgot to breathe. The frightening thing about Everett was not that he sounded powerful. It was that he never needed to. 10 minutes later, Caleb had photographed both devices and the visible wiring. Everett stayed in the hallway the entire time. He did not hover. He did not ask what Caleb had done in the room. He did not even glance toward the bed. When Caleb finally stepped out, Everett held out a bottle of water, then paused before offering it closer. "Sealed," he said. Caleb looked at the untouched cap. Such a tiny detail. Such an absurdly thoughtful detail. After discovering he had been watched without permission, even a bottle of water came with proof that nobody had interfered with it. Caleb took it. "Thank you." You do not have to thank me. People say that when they want to be thanked. Everett's mouth almost moved into a smile. Then I will try harder. Against every reasonable expectation, Caleb let out a small laugh. It surprised him enough that he covered his mouth. Everett looked equally startled, then relieved. That was the first moment Caleb saw the man beneath the reputation. Not the property developer. Not Mason's intimidating older brother. Just someone who had been waiting to hear proof that Caleb could still laugh. Mason appeared at the far end of the hall with his phone. Caleb, we need to talk without him. Caleb's brief warmth vanished. No, you are confused. I found 2 hidden cameras. You are emotional. Everett shifted, but Caleb raised a hand. Do not. Everett stopped immediately. Caleb faced Mason himself. I am a photographer. I found the cameras because I understand lenses, placement, wiring, and sight lines. I photographed everything before you could touch it. I am scared. I am not confused. Silence. Everett looked at Caleb with unmistakable approval. Mason looked at him as if he had become inconvenient. Fine, Mason said. Leave. But whatever happens after that is on you. Caleb felt the old reflex rise, the urge to calm him, negotiate, make things easier. Then Everett spoke from beside him. Caleb already answered you. Not for him. Beside him. Somehow that distinction mattered. Mason walked away. A door slammed downstairs. Caleb released a breath. I cannot go home, he admitted. Everett frowned. Because Mason has access? He knows the building. He knows where I keep a spare key. Caleb hated how small his voice sounded. I need somewhere he does not expect me to be. Everett considered this for only a second. There is a guest house about 200 yards down the property. Separate entrance. Separate alarm. I can have my access removed from the system and put yours in. Caleb stared. You would lock yourself out of your own guest house. If that helps you sleep tonight. You barely know me. Everett's gaze settled on him, steady and strangely gentle. I know you said no, and my brother decided that did not matter. I know enough. Something inside Caleb loosened. Not trust. Not yet. But perhaps the first inch of road toward it. Everett placed a small security card on the console instead of handing it directly to him. Your choice. Caleb looked at the card, then at the keys already in his hand. Hours ago, he had arrived believing trust meant giving someone access to every part of himself. Now the most powerful man in the house was offering him a locked door that even he could not open. Caleb picked up the card. I will stay. Everett nodded once. Then Caleb's phone buzzed. A message from Mason appeared across the screen. You should ask Everett what happens to the recordings if you make this public. Caleb stared at it. Everett noticed his expression but did not reach for the phone. What happened? Caleb looked up at the man he had just chosen to trust by exactly 1 inch. I think your brother believes your name matters more to you than what he did to me. Everett went completely still. Then he said, Tomorrow, I will prove him wrong. Caleb slept for exactly 43 minutes. He knew because the guest house clock read 3:12 when he finally closed his eyes and 3:55 when a tiny green light on the thermostat woke him with his heart pounding. It was only an indicator. He checked anyway. By sunrise, he had inspected 2 vents, 3 smoke detectors, a television, and 1 deeply suspicious coffee maker. Nothing. He hated that Mason had turned ordinary objects into threats. At 7:20, someone knocked. 3 measured taps. Caleb froze until Everett spoke through the closed door. It is me. I am staying outside. Caleb opened it a few inches. Everett stood on the porch holding a paper bag and 2 coffees. He had changed clothes, but judging by the shadows beneath his eyes, he had not slept either. Breakfast, Everett said. I did not know what you liked, so I bought too much. Caleb glanced past him. 2 black SUVs were parked near the main villa. Several people in business clothes were walking inside. What is happening? My legal counsel, property manager, and security director are here. Caleb stiffened. Everett noticed immediately. Nobody enters this house unless you invite them. That helped more than Caleb wanted it to. 20 minutes later, he followed Everett back to the villa carrying his camera bag like armor. The dining room had transformed into an emergency meeting space. Laptops. Documents. Serious faces. The conversation stopped when Caleb entered. A gray-haired man near the windows looked him over, then turned to Everett. We should probably speak privately before involving the guest. Caleb felt the word land. Guest. Temporary. Inconvenient. Everett removed his coat. Caleb is not a guest in this conversation. He discovered the devices. Of course, the man said, in the careful tone people used when they meant something else. But our technical team can handle the evidence. Caleb almost stepped back. Everett did not. Your technical team inspected this property after renovation. The room became very quiet. Everett placed Caleb's photographs on the table. Caleb found 2 devices in less than 15 minutes. The man looked down. Everett continued, calm as winter. So before anyone decides whose expertise matters, I suggest you look at his work. Caleb stared at him. No dramatic speech. No attempt to make Caleb seem helpless enough to deserve sympathy. Everett had simply put his competence on the table and expected everyone else to respect it. One by one, they examined the photographs. The security director leaned closer. You documented the serial numbers before removing anything? Yes, Caleb said. And the mounting points. The bedroom camera is wired through the west wall. He pointed to an image. This cable disappears behind newer trim. If it connects to local storage, the hub is probably somewhere along the renovation route. The director looked impressed despite himself. You can tell that from photographs. Buildings tell you where people change them. Everett's gaze rested on Caleb for a second too long. Something warm and unfamiliar moved through Caleb's chest. Recognition. The group moved into the west corridor. Caleb followed the trim line until it reached a paneled utility closet. The security director checked inside and shook his head. Nothing. Caleb studied the wall. Then he noticed 4 screw heads. 3 were painted ivory. 1 was bright silver. That panel has been opened recently. Everett stepped beside him. Show me. Caleb pointed. Everett did not call the security director. He handed Caleb a flashlight. You're fine. The panel came away to reveal a compact network box tucked behind the wall. Nobody spoke. Caleb swallowed. That is our storage hub. The security director checked the connections. His expression hardened. Local drive. Remote synchronization enabled. Caleb's stomach turned. Everett moved closer, stopping before their shoulders touched. You do not have to look at what is on it. Caleb glanced at him. I need to know enough to protect myself. Everett nodded. Then you decide how much is enough. The drive directory appeared on the laptop. Dated folders filled the screen. Weeks of them. Caleb went cold. Everett quietly lowered the laptop lid before any file opened. The folder structure is evidence. You do not need to hurt yourself to prove the contents exist. Caleb looked at his hand. Everett's fingers were curled tightly around the edge of the table, knuckles pale. He was angry. Not performatively angry. Not possessive. Angry for Caleb. The gray-haired attorney cleared his throat. Everett, there is another consideration. If these recordings were made using infrastructure connected to a Sloan development property, disclosure could expose the company to significant liability. Caleb remembered Mason's message. Your name matters more. Everett looked at the attorney. Preserve everything. I strongly recommend we discuss exposure first. Preserve everything. Everett repeated. No deletion. No alteration. No private settlement offered in Caleb's name. He chooses what happens next. The attorney fell silent. Caleb suddenly understood why people were afraid of Everett Sloan. Then Everett turned toward him, and that intimidating expression softened instantly. Are you all right? The contrast nearly undid him. Not really. Fair answer. Caleb managed a weak smile. Everett noticed that too. By noon, the others had left, taking secured copies under documented custody. Caleb remained at the dining table while Everett stood at the windows, phone vibrating repeatedly in his hand. He declined 3 calls without answering. On the 4th, Caleb caught the caller name before Everett turned the screen over. Sloan Development Board. You are getting in trouble because of me, Caleb said. Everett looked genuinely offended. Because of Mason. Your board apparently disagrees. My board gets paid to disagree with me. Caleb laughed before he could stop himself. Everett smiled this time, small but real. Then his phone buzzed again. A message appeared across the screen before it went dark. Emergency board session. Reputation containment required. Caleb's fragile warmth faded. Everett looked at the message, then at him. I told you I would prove Mason wrong. How? Everett picked up his coat, but did not put it on. By making a choice he never believed I would make. He placed a second security card beside Caleb's hand. The guest house remains yours as long as you need it. I have removed my access completely. Caleb stared at the card. Everett, you need one place where? Nobody enters unless you say yes. Something shifted between them then. Caleb had spent the night believing Everett was helping because he was responsible for the property. Now Everett was risking something real, and Caleb was beginning to understand that responsibility was no longer the only reason. Everett headed toward the door. Caleb surprised himself by calling after him. "Where are you going?" Everett stopped. "To tell my board there will be no reputation containment." He glanced back, and that if they want someone to stay quiet, they can start with Mason. For the first time since the camera had been found, Caleb did not feel like the smallest person in a powerful family scandal. Someone with far more to lose had just made his first public choice, and he had chosen Caleb. By late afternoon, Caleb learned that rich families did not panic more gracefully than everyone else. They simply did it around longer tables. Everett had been gone less than 2 hours when a black sedan stopped outside the villa, and 3 members of Sloan Development's executive team arrived with the gray-haired attorney Caleb remembered from that morning. Everett returned 5 minutes later. He walked into the dining room without removing his coat, listened to 30 seconds of carefully polished concern, and said, "Caleb stays." The attorney sighed. Nobody asked him to leave. You sent him a non-disclosure agreement. Caleb looked up sharply. A document had arrived in his email 10 minutes earlier, described as routine protection for everyone involved. He had not opened it. Everett placed his phone on the table. You contacted him without his attorney present and asked him to sign something limiting disclosure. Do not call that routine. One executive shifted uncomfortably. Everett, the company owns the property. We have obligations to investors. And Caleb has rights that existed before our investors became nervous. Caleb felt every eye turned toward him. One man near the fireplace studied his thrift store jacket and camera bag with open skepticism. With respect, we barely know this young man. We have only his version of events. There it was. Caleb had been waiting for it. He could almost hear Mason's voice inside the sentence. Emotional, confused, opportunistic. Caleb straightened. You have photographs, serial numbers, access records, and a storage device your own security director recovered, which is being examined, the man replied. Until then, we should avoid assumptions. Everett could have ended the conversation with his title. Instead, he pulled out a chair beside Caleb and sat down. It was such a simple movement that Caleb almost missed what it meant. Everett was not positioning himself at the head of the table. He was positioning himself next to Caleb. Then let us avoid assumptions, Everett said. Ask him what he found. The executive blinked. Excuse me. You questioned his account. Ask him. Caleb looked at Everett. Everett did not answer for him. That mattered. Caleb opened his camera bag and removed a tablet. The first device was 12 feet from the bed. Its angle was approximately 20 degrees downward, which gave it a direct view of the sleeping area. The second was concealed inside a decorative vent. Both were connected through modifications made after the original renovation. He displayed the photographs one by one. I documented everything before removal because I knew somebody might later suggest I misunderstood what I saw. Nobody interrupted now. Caleb showed them the mismatched screw, the cable route, the hidden network box. The skeptical executive slowly leaned forward. You identified all of that yourself? Yes. Everett spoke quietly, while frightened, after discovering someone he trusted had violated his privacy. Caleb's throat tightened. Everett continued. So if anyone in this room intends to describe him as confused again, choose another meeting. Silence. Cold for everyone else. Gentle for Caleb. It should not have affected him as much as it did. Then the attorney's phone rang. He stepped away, listened, and returned looking grim. Mason has retained counsel. Everett showed no reaction. Expected. He is claiming Caleb consented to being recorded. Caleb's stomach dropped. That is a lie. I know. Everett said immediately. Not I believe you. I know. The certainty steadied Caleb before panic could take hold. The attorney continued. Mason is also alleging Caleb threatened to expose private Sloan family matters unless he received compensation. Caleb stood so quickly his chair scraped backward. I never asked him for money. Everett rose too, but he did not touch him. Caleb, he is making me sound like I planned this. Look at me. Caleb did. Everett's expression had lost its corporate coldness completely. You photographed the evidence before anyone told you to. You refused to surrender the camera. You asked for deletion, not money. Those facts exist whether Mason likes them or not. Caleb breathed. Once. Twice. The room slowly stopped spinning. The skeptical executive cleared his throat. There is still the public relations issue. Everett turned toward him, and the warmth disappeared so fast it was almost startling. There is no public relations issue in this room. There is a victim of unauthorized recording and a company deciding whether it has enough integrity to say that plainly. Nobody challenged him. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Caleb remained at the table after everyone left, exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. Everett silently placed a takeout menu beside him. You have eaten half a bagel today. Caleb stared. You noticed? Unfortunately, I noticed things too. That is supposed to be my thing. You are significantly better at it. Caleb smiled despite himself. Everett ordered dinner only after Caleb chose what he wanted. Later, when darkness settled over the estate, Caleb returned to the guest house. He checked the thermostat light once, then forced himself to stop. 5 minutes later came 3 quiet knocks. Caleb opened the door. Everett stood outside, holding a small toolbox. The porch light is flickering, he said. I thought it might bother you tonight. May I fix it? Caleb stared at the man who could apparently summon attorneys, executives, and security teams with a phone call, standing on his porch offering to repair a $12 light, because he had noticed Caleb was afraid of blinking electronics. Yes, Caleb said softly. Everett fixed it in silence. When he finished, he remained outside the threshold. Caleb realized he wanted to ask him in. The realization frightened him almost as much as it comforted him. Before he could decide, Everett's phone rang. His face hardened as he read the screen. What? Caleb asked. Everett hesitated. Mason has contacted the board directly. He is demanding they remove me from handling anything connected to this investigation. Can they? They can try. Caleb looked at the repaired porch light, now steady and warm above them. Because you sided with me? Everett met his eyes. Because I refused to side against you. Something shifted inside Caleb, quiet but irreversible. Yesterday, he had believed he was trapped inside Mason's version of reality. Tonight, someone was risking his own standing to make sure Caleb could keep his. Everett started down the steps. Get some rest. Everett. He turned. Caleb opened the door wider. You can come inside for coffee. Everett went still. Not because coffee mattered. Because they both understood the invitation did. He looked at Caleb carefully. Are you sure? Caleb nodded. I am. Everett stepped across the threshold only then. And somewhere across the estate, while Mason prepared to make Everett pay for choosing Caleb, Caleb made a choice of his own. For the first time since finding the cameras, he let someone into a room because he wanted him there. The coffee had gone cold before Caleb noticed Everett was not drinking his. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, the repaired porch light glowing steadily beyond the window, while Everett's phone vibrated for the 6th time in 20 minutes. He ignored every call. Caleb should have found that reassuring. Instead, something felt wrong. Everett had spent 2 days telling everyone that Caleb deserved control over what happened next. Yet every conversation about the company seemed to stop the moment Caleb entered the room. You should answer, Caleb said. Everett turned his phone face down. It can wait. Your board is trying to remove you because of this. That is my problem. There it was again. The careful wall disguised as protection. Caleb leaned back. You keep saying that. Everett's expression tightened. Because it is true. Before Caleb could answer, headlights swept across the guest house windows. A car stopped outside. Everett stood immediately. The gray-haired attorney appeared on the porch carrying a leather folder. His face changed when Caleb opened the door. I thought you were alone. Caleb almost laughed. Somehow, he was always the person people wished was not in the room. Everett stepped beside him. Whatever you came to say it in front of Caleb. The attorney hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Everett, Caleb said quietly. What do I not know? Everett looked at him, and for the first time since they met, Caleb saw uncertainty in the man everyone else seemed afraid to challenge. The attorney placed the folder on the table. The emergency board session starts in 40 minutes. If you refuse their proposal, they intend to invoke the succession clause. Caleb frowned. Succession? Everett closed his eyes briefly. The attorney continued before he could stop him. Everett is not merely the chief executive officer of Sloan Development. He controls the family trust that owns the majority voting interest. He also controls Mason's distributions from that trust. Caleb went still. Pieces rearranged themselves. The villa. The instant revocation of Mason's access. Executives appearing within hours. Mason going directly to the board. His warning that Everett's name mattered. You control Mason's money? Caleb asked. Everett answered carefully. Most of his access to family assets, yes. And Mason is in financial trouble. Silence. Caleb felt the answer before Everett gave it. Yes. How much trouble? Enough that he asked me for an advance 6 months ago. I refused. Caleb stood. The chair legs scraped against the floor. 6 months. The same 6 months Mason had become controlling. The same 6 months he had started asking Caleb increasingly invasive questions about his work, his clients, his savings. Caleb stared at Everett. You knew he was desperate for money. I knew he had made reckless investments. I did not know about the cameras. But you knew something was wrong with him. I knew he was angry with me. And you never told me. Everett's voice lowered. I barely knew you. You knew enough to know I was dating him. That landed. Everett did not defend himself. Caleb hated that part of him respected the silence. Why would recordings of me help him financially, he asked. Everett looked toward the attorney, then back at Caleb. Because Mason believed I would pay to prevent a scandal connected to a Sloan property. Caleb's stomach dropped. So I was leverage against you. Possibly. And you figured that out when? Everett did not answer quickly enough. Caleb stepped back. When? Last night, after Mason's message. Hurt flashed hotter than anger. Everett had stood beneath this roof, repaired a light because Caleb was afraid, accepted an invitation Caleb had struggled to give, all while carrying a theory that changed the entire meaning of what Mason had done. You let me think this was only about controlling me. I was not certain. You could have told me you suspected it. You had just discovered that someone you trusted had recorded you. I did not want to give you another possibility before I had evidence. So you decided what I could handle. Everett flinched. Caleb saw it. That is exactly what Mason did. Caleb said, quieter now. He decided what I was allowed to know. Caleb, I never intended to control you. Intent is not the same as choice. The words stayed between them. Everett looked suddenly less like the untouchable man from the boardroom and more like someone who had just recognized his own worst habit. You are right, he said. No excuse. No corporate explanation. I spent years cleaning up Mason's disasters by deciding what everyone needed before they could decide for themselves. I thought withholding an unproven theory was protecting you. His jaw tightened. It was not my decision to make. Caleb wanted that apology to fix something. It did not. That hurt too. The attorney quietly pushed the folder toward Everett. The board's proposal requires Caleb to sign confidentiality terms. In exchange, the company contains the matter internally, and Mason relinquishes his trust distributions. Caleb stared at the document. There it was. The clean solution. The wealthy solution. Everyone protected except the person who had already lost his privacy. Everett picked up the folder. For one terrible second, Caleb wondered whether this was what Mason had predicted all along. Everett opened it, removed the proposed agreement, and tore it cleanly in half. The attorney went pale. Everett. Tell the board there will be no agreement involving Caleb without Caleb requesting it. They may challenge your control of the company. Then they challenge it. Caleb's anger faltered. Everett placed the torn pages on the table, but did not move closer. I should have told you what I suspected. I cannot undo that. What I can do is stop deciding for you now. Caleb looked at him. I need space. Pain crossed Everett's face before the familiar control returned. You have it. He walked to the door, then stopped without turning around. The guest house remains yours. My access stays disabled. Whatever happens at the board meeting does not change that. Then he left. Caleb stood alone beneath the steady porch light Everett had fixed for him. 10 minutes later, his phone buzzed. Not Everett. The attorney had copied him on a formal notice from Sloan Development. Emergency vote initiated. Everett Sloan's authority over the investigation and family trust was being challenged effective that night. Caleb read it twice. He was still angry, still hurt, still unsure whether he could trust Everett again. But now he understood something that frightened him in an entirely different way. Everett had known exactly what telling the board no might cost him, and he had done it anyway. Rain started just after midnight, soft at first, then hard enough to blur the guest house windows into sheets of silver. Caleb was still awake. He had spent an hour reading the board notice and another hour refusing to read it again. Everett had lost nothing yet, technically, but the possibility was there now because he had refused to trade Caleb's silence for stability. Caleb was still angry with him. That truth could exist beside another one. Everett had left when Caleb asked him to. No argument. No attempt to make forgiveness the price of protection. At 12:47, headlights appeared through the rain. Caleb expected Everett to come to the door. He did not. 10 minutes passed. Curious despite himself, Caleb looked outside and saw Everett sitting alone on the guest house porch steps, soaked through, his coat dark with rain. Caleb opened the door. "What are you doing?" Everett looked up. Exhaustion had erased most of the intimidating executive from his face. "The main house is full of board members. And I did not particularly want to be there. You could have knocked." Everett glanced at the doorway. "You asked for space." Caleb stared at him. The man had apparently interpreted space with geographic precision. "You are getting soaked." "I noticed." "Come inside." Everett did not move. "Are you sure?" Caleb almost smiled. "Yes, I am sure." Only then did Everett enter. Caleb handed him a towel and pointed toward a chair. "Sit. You are surprisingly commanding in your own kitchen. I learned from a terrifying real estate executive." That earned the faintest smile. Caleb made tea while Everett dried his hair, and for several minutes neither mentioned Mason, recordings, attorneys, or billion-dollar companies. It felt almost rebellious. Then Caleb noticed Everett's hands. They were trembling. Did the vote happen? Everett wrapped both hands around the mug. "It was postponed until tomorrow." "Why?" "Because they want me to reconsider." "Will you?" "No, too fast." "Too certain." Caleb sat opposite him. "Why?" Everett looked toward the rain. "My father died when Mason was 19. I was 24. Caleb said nothing. Everett continued slowly. "Everyone decided I was the responsible one. The company became mine to stabilize. The trust became mine to manage. Mason became mine to rescue." His mouth twisted. "I became very good at preventing disasters. I became terrible at asking people what they needed." Caleb understood more than he wanted to. "So when you suspected Mason was using me against you, you went into problem-solving mode." "Yes." Everett met his eyes. "And I hurt you while convincing myself I was preventing more harm." Caleb let the silence remain. "Understanding why does not make it okay. I know. I am still angry." "You should be." No defense. No request for absolution. Caleb looked down at his tea. "Mason used to make me feel unreasonable whenever I asked questions. Eventually, I started asking fewer." Everett's expression tightened. "I am sorry. Do not fix it." Everett stopped. Caleb almost laughed at how visibly difficult that instruction was for him. "Just listen." So Everett listened. Caleb told him about the little things. Mason checking his schedule. Mason making jokes about Caleb's income. Mason turning every boundary into evidence that Caleb did not trust him enough. Nothing dramatic by itself. That was what made it worse. Caleb had adapted 1 inch at a time until he barely recognized how much space he had surrendered. When he finished, Everett said quietly, "You deserve to be believed before you had photographs." Caleb looked at him. That was not a promise. It was recognition. Somehow it reached deeper. Morning came gray and cold. The rain weakened to a drizzle, and Caleb realized Everett had fallen asleep sitting upright in the chair, still wearing yesterday's shirt. His phone rested silent on the table. Caleb could have woken him. Instead, he found a blanket and placed it over Everett's shoulders. Everett woke immediately. "Sorry. For sleeping. For staying." Caleb shook his head. "I invited you." Everett went still. Caleb understood then why those words mattered to both of them. "I invited you. Not obligation. Not rescue. Choice." Everett stood to leave, but Caleb picked up his camera bag. "I want to go back to the villa." Concern flashed across Everett's face. "You do not have to." "I know. That is why I am choosing to." They returned together. In the bedroom, Caleb stopped 3 feet inside the doorway. His breathing tightened. Everett noticed, but remained where he was. "Do you want me closer?" Caleb looked at the empty space between them. Yesterday, he would have said no automatically. Today, he considered the question. "Your hand," he said. Everett held it out, palm up. Caleb crossed the distance himself and took it. Warm. Steady. Nothing demanded. Caleb breathed again. Then he noticed something near the molding behind a bookshelf. A tiny irregularity. He released Everett's hand, crouched, and examined it. "There is another one." Everett's face changed. Security had missed it. Caleb had not. He photographed the device before anyone touched it. Everett watched him work, something unmistakable in his expression. "You really do see what everyone else misses." Caleb stood. Including you, apparently. Everett raised an eyebrow. What do you see? Caleb looked at the exhausted man who had sat in the rain rather than violate a boundary. Someone who thinks being useful is the only way people will keep him around. Everett said nothing. For once, Caleb had found the hidden thing. Then Everett's phone rang. He answered, listened, and went pale. What happened? Caleb asked. Everett lowered the phone. Mason's attorney just filed a statement claiming you planted the cameras to extort the family. Caleb felt Everett's hand close gently around his only after Caleb reached for it first. Then we prove he lied, Caleb said. Everett looked down at their joined hands, then back at Caleb. This time, neither of them let go. By 10 the next morning, Caleb's name was on 3 local news sites and 1 business blog he had never heard of. None of them called him a photographer. One called him Mason Sloan's disgruntled former boyfriend. Another called him an aspiring influencer, which would have been funny if Caleb had not been sitting in Everett's conference room watching strangers decide what kind of person he was. The worst headline used the word extortion. Do not read the comments, Everett's attorney said. Caleb looked up from his phone. That advice would have been more useful 20 comments ago. Across the table, Everett said nothing. He had been silent since arriving at Sloan Development headquarters 40 minutes earlier, and Caleb hated how quickly that silence found every old wound Mason had left behind. The emergency board meeting was already tense when Mason arrived with his attorney. He looked rested, polished, almost wounded. Caleb wanted to throw something expensive at the wall on principle. Instead, he placed his camera bag beside his chair and kept both hands visible on the table. Mason's attorney connected a laptop to the conference room display. Before this board allows an outside party to damage the company, you should understand his financial motive. A screenshot appeared. It showed a text conversation between Caleb and Mason. Caleb recognized his own messages immediately. I cannot keep living like this. If you expect me to stay, something has to change. Below it was another line. I need enough money to get out. Caleb stared. That is not the conversation. Mason folded his hands. It is your number. You cut out half the messages. The attorney changed slides. A bank statement appeared next. Caleb's account balance was displayed before 12 strangers. Heat rushed into his face. $482. His private humiliation enlarged across a 70-inch screen. Someone at the far end of the table whispered something. Caleb did not hear the words. He heard the meaning. Poor. Angry. Dating a wealthy man. Asking for money. Mason spoke softly. Caleb was struggling. I helped him constantly. You paid for vacations you chose, Caleb said. I paid my own rent. When you could. Caleb felt the room tilt. Mason knew exactly where to press. He always had. The next image was worse. A photograph of Caleb leaving the guest house beside Everett 2 mornings earlier. Everett's coat was draped around Caleb's shoulders because it had been raining. Cropped tightly, the picture looked intimate. Calculated. And now, Mason's attorney said, he is staying on property controlled by Everett Sloan while Everett threatens the family trust on his behalf. Every face turned toward Caleb. The story Mason wanted them to see assembled itself beautifully. Caleb had traded one wealthy Sloan brother for another. That is disgusting, Caleb whispered. Mason leaned back. Is it false? Caleb looked at Everett. Say something. Everett's jaw was tight, his attention fixed on the documents in front of Mason's attorney. Everett, Caleb said. Everett finally looked at him, but instead of answering, he turned to his own attorney. I want the original files for every screenshot, including metadata and full message exports. Mason's attorney objected. Everett ignored him. And the source of the photograph? Caleb's chest tightened. He understood what Everett was doing intellectually. Verification. Evidence. The careful work that had protected Caleb before. Emotion did not care. Emotion only knew that Caleb had just been humiliated in front of a room full of powerful strangers, and the one man he had started trusting had not said, I believe him. One board member cleared his throat. Until those materials are authenticated, perhaps Caleb should leave while we discuss internal matters. Caleb waited. Everett remained silent, staring at the screen as if something there had caught his attention. That silence lasted perhaps 3 seconds. It felt like 3 years. Caleb stood. You do not have to ask twice. Everett's head snapped toward him. Caleb. No, Caleb picked up his camera bag. His hands were shaking now, and he hated that Mason noticed. I know what it looks like. You do not, Everett said. Then tell me. Everett looked toward the board, then Mason's attorney, then the displayed messages. Something calculated moved behind his eyes. I need 5 minutes. Caleb almost laughed. Of course you do. Caleb, please. That word nearly stopped him. Everett Sloan did not seem like a man who said please often. But Caleb had spent too much of his life waiting for someone else to decide when he deserved the truth. I cannot sit here while everyone decides whether I am worth believing. He walked out. Nobody stopped him. That hurt most. In the elevator, Caleb stared at his reflection in the mirrored doors. 2 days ago, Everett had told him he deserved to be believed before he had photographs. Today, Caleb had photographs, timestamps, expertise, evidence, and somehow Mason had still managed to turn him into the suspicious one. His phone buzzed before he reached the lobby. A message from an unknown number contained a link to another article. This one included the photograph of Caleb wearing Everett's coat. Sources close to the Sloan family question whether Rowan engineered scandal to become close to company heir. Caleb stopped breathing for a second. Company heir. Opportunist. Liar. He blocked the number and stepped outside into cold rain. He had almost reached the curb when the conference room, door 30 floors above, opened again. Caleb could not see Everett standing at the head of the table. He could not see the untouched evidence folder in Everett's hand or the security director entering with the original server logs Caleb had helped preserve. He only knew Everett had stayed behind. And after everything Mason had taught him about trust, staying behind felt dangerously close to choosing the other side. Caleb had been standing beneath the awning for less than 2 minutes when the glass doors behind him opened. Mr. Rowan. The security director hurried into the rain. Mr. Sloan asked you to come back upstairs. Caleb almost kept walking. Then the man added, he found it. 10 minutes later, Caleb stepped into the conference room and discovered that nobody was sitting anymore. Everett stood at the head of the table beside the 70-inch screen. Mason and his attorney were across from him. The board members looked considerably less comfortable than they had when Caleb left. Everett saw Caleb and immediately moved away from the head of the table. He pulled out the chair beside his own. You can stay, or you can leave, he said. But nobody discusses you again without you in the room. Caleb remained standing. What did you find? Everett nodded toward the security director. The screen changed. 2 versions of Caleb's text conversation appeared side by side. On the left was Mason's screenshot. On the right was the complete message export. Caleb read the missing lines aloud before anyone could do it for him. I need enough money to get out of this apartment. I am taking 2 extra photography jobs next month. He looked directly at Mason. You removed the second sentence. Mason's attorney started to speak. Everett raised one hand. There is more. The security director displayed the file metadata. Mason's screenshot had been exported the previous night, then edited before being sent to his attorney. Next came the bank records. Everett did not look at Caleb's balance. He looked at the board. You were shown $482 to make poverty look like motive. What you were not shown is that Caleb never received a payment from Mason, from me, from the trust, or from Sloan Development. Another document appeared. Caleb recognized the timestamps immediately. His photographs. These images were created before Caleb knew I had returned to the property, Everett said. They contained the original metadata, including location and time. He documented the devices before speaking to me, before speaking to an attorney, and before anyone offered him anything. The security director changed the screen again. Access logs filled it. The concealed storage system was activated using Mason Sloan's property credential, he said. Multiple times over 6 weeks. Mason went pale. That does not prove I installed it. Caleb heard himself answer. The silver screw does. Everyone looked at him. He opened his camera bag and placed a photograph on the table. The hidden panel had 3 original painted screws and 1 replacement. I photographed it before your security team opened the wall. The director nodded. We checked maintenance records. That panel had not been serviced since renovation. Everett looked around the table. Caleb found what our own inspection missed. He preserved evidence while frightened. He refused to surrender the camera when Mason attempted to take it. And somehow this room spent 20 minutes asking whether his bank balance made him dishonest. Nobody met Caleb's eyes. The executive who had questioned him earlier finally said, Mr. Rowan, I owe you an apology. Caleb surprised himself. Yes, you do. Everett looked at him then, and something almost proud crossed his face. Mason pushed back from the table. This is insane. Everett is destroying this family over someone he met twice before this week. Everett went very still. No, you did that. You are risking control of the company for him. Yes. One word. No hesitation. Caleb's breath caught. Everett turned toward the board. For the record, Caleb and I had no personal relationship when he discovered those cameras. I helped him because what happened was wrong. What I feel about him now is irrelevant to whether he deserves protection. His eyes found Caleb's. But it is not. Irrelevant to me. The room disappeared for one impossible second. Everett did not say anything more romantic than that. He did something harder. He slid a signed document across the table. The attorney read it and went silent. What is that? Mason demanded. Everett answered without looking at him. My authorization for full cooperation with investigators, including company access records and trust records relevant to your actions. The board told you not to release those. I know. They can remove you. I know that too. Everett turned to Caleb. I will not purchase my position with your silence. Caleb understood then. Everett was not rescuing him from consequences. He was accepting consequences beside him. Mason's own attorney quietly closed his laptop. The family trust immediately suspended Mason's discretionary distributions pending formal review, exactly the money he had been trying to protect. His manipulated screenshots were preserved with the rest of the evidence. His attempt to discredit Caleb had not erased the trail. It had added to it. Mason looked at Caleb as though expecting the old version of him to shrink. Caleb did not. I trusted you, Caleb said. His voice remained steady. You treated that like permission to control me. It was not. Mason had no answer. Caleb picked up his photographs himself. Nobody called him confused. Nobody called him opportunistic. Nobody looked at him with pity. When the meeting finally ended, Everett remained by the windows while everyone else filed out. He did not approach Caleb. He waited. Caleb crossed the room first. You stayed behind because you were checking the metadata. Yes. You could have told me. Everett lowered his eyes. I should have. Caleb appreciated that he did not decorate the answer. I thought you chose them. I know. Everett looked almost afraid now, which seemed impossible for a man who had just challenged an entire board. I cannot ask you to trust me because I proved Mason lied. Those are different things. Caleb felt the last of his anger soften without disappearing. Good. Everett blinked. Good. Because I do not want another man telling me what I should feel. A small smile touched Everett's face. Caleb looked at the conference table, the evidence, the documents Everett had signed knowing exactly what they could cost him. Then he reached for Everett's hand. Everett did not close his fingers until Caleb did first. Outside, the rain had stopped. The scandal was not magically gone. Investigation still had to happen. Caleb still had healing to do. Everett still had to learn that love was not another responsibility to manage. But when they walked out of the conference room together, Caleb finally understood the difference between being rescued and being chosen. He was not leaving beside Everett because he needed somewhere to hide. He was leaving beside him because, after everything, he wanted to see what happened when two people chose each other freely. 3 months later, Caleb stood in the master bedroom of the villa with a camera pointed at the bed. For one strange second, the symmetry of it almost stole his breath. Same windows, same pale walls, same late afternoon sunlight stretching across the floor. But the hidden devices were gone. Every unauthorized recording recovered during the investigation had been secured as evidence. Every known copy accounted for through the preserved storage and access records, and Mason no longer had access to the estate or discretionary family funds while the legal process continued. Caleb had stopped following every update. He had learned there was a difference between protecting himself and allowing Mason to occupy permanent space inside his head. Today, the villa belonged to something new. Sloan Development had hired Caleb to photograph the restored property for its architectural portfolio. Caleb had almost refused when the offer arrived. Then he saw the contract. Standard market rate. Full creative control. No special clause. No favor disguised as generosity. Everett had not even signed it. You told them not to give me special treatment, Caleb had said. I told them to hire the best photographer available. Everett replied. They chose you. Caleb had pretended that sentence did not stay with him for days. Now he adjusted his lens and photographed the bedroom from the doorway. His hands did not shake. That surprised him. Healing had not arrived dramatically. It had appeared in smaller victories. Sleeping through the night. leaving his phone face down without wondering who was monitoring him, saying no without preparing an explanation, letting Everett visit his apartment, then laughing when Everett waited outside because Caleb had forgotten to explicitly invite him in. Everett had changed too. He asked instead of assuming. He stopped trying to solve every silence. When Caleb was upset, Everett no longer arrived carrying 3 solutions and an attorney. Usually he arrived carrying coffee. Sometimes he simply listened. They had not rushed whatever existed between them. Caleb needed that. Everett, surprisingly, needed it too. You were staring at that smoke detector again. Caleb lowered his camera. Everett stood in the doorway, jacket folded over one arm. Professional assessment. You inspected it yesterday. Professional paranoia. Everett nodded solemnly. Much more respectable. Caleb smiled. 3 months ago, he would have been embarrassed by the admission. Now he knew fear did not make him weak. Staying afraid forever would have been the tragedy. He walked toward the window. Outside, the property glowed beneath a clear autumn sky. Everett remained by the door. He still did that sometimes, waiting at thresholds. Caleb had once thought it was excessive. Now he understood. Everett remembered. The board confirmed the new policy this morning. Everett said, no private surveillance installation on residential properties without documented authorization and disclosure. Caleb glanced at him. You actually changed company policy because of this? Because the old policy failed. That sounds suspiciously like fixing things. Everett sighed. I am recovering slowly. Caleb laughed. Then he noticed Everett watching him with that expression he had learned to recognize. Quiet, warm, almost disbelieving, as though Caleb laughing in this room was something Everett had not expected to witness. Caleb lifted his camera. Everett immediately straightened. What? Stay there. Everett did. Sunlight caught the edge of his dark ash-blonde hair and softened the severe lines of his face. Caleb raised the camera, then stopped. 3 months earlier, someone else had decided that access to Caleb meant permission. Caleb would never confuse those things again. He lowered the camera slightly. Can I take your picture? Everett's expression changed. He understood the question beneath the question. Yes. Caleb looked through the viewfinder. Everett was terrible at posing. Predictably terrible. You look like somebody just informed you taxes have become sentient. I am smiling. That is absolutely not a smile. Everett tried again. Somehow it became worse. Caleb lowered the camera, laughing. Everett laughed too, and that was the photograph Caleb took. Not the controlled executive. Not the heir who could silence a boardroom. Everett, caught in an ordinary moment of happiness because Caleb had chosen to see him. The shutter clicked once. Caleb lowered the camera. Perfect. Everett walked closer, stopping an arm's length away. Caleb, yes. I love you. There was no grand speech after it. No demand hiding inside the confession. Everett simply stood there and allowed the words to belong to Caleb however Caleb wanted to receive them. Once, Caleb might have answered because he was afraid silence would cost him the relationship. Now he took his time. He looked at the man who had protected him, disappointed him, listened when Caleb called him out, changed his behavior, risked something real, and never once demanded affection as repayment. Caleb set the camera carefully on the windowsill. I love you too. Everett exhaled like a man who had forgotten breathing was necessary. Caleb smiled. You can kiss me now. Are you sure, Everett? I am recovering slowly. Caleb closed the distance himself and kissed him, gentle and brief, then rested his forehead against Everett's. Later, when they walked downstairs, Caleb paused beside the hallway console where Everett had once placed a security card rather than putting it into Caleb's hand. The guest house card was still on Caleb's key ring. He removed it and held it toward Everett. I do not need this anymore. Everett accepted it carefully. Ready to go home? Caleb looked back toward the bedroom, toward the sunlight and the camera he had deliberately left sitting in plain sight. Home. The word no longer meant a locked place where nobody could reach him. It meant somewhere he could choose who entered. Caleb took Everett's hand. Yes. They walked out together. Behind them was the room where Caleb had learned that being watched was not the same as being seen, that being wanted was not the same as being loved, and that trust was never surrender. 3 months ago, Caleb had discovered a camera someone else had hidden to take away his choice. Today, the only camera in the room belonged to him. The only photograph it held had been taken with permission, and the future waiting beyond its frame was finally his to choose.